It's late. The kind of late when the world finally exhales and everything slows down. The hum of the day has faded, the streets outside are quiet, and you're here, maybe restless, maybe thoughtful, maybe just looking for something soft to rest your mind on before sleep comes. Welcome. You're exactly where you need to be. Tonight, I want to tell you a story. Not about heroes or distant lands, but about something gentler. About courage that doesn't roar and strength that whispers. About a man who discovered something unexpected, not in his pride, but in his chest. And through that discovery, he found a new way of seeing himself, of loving, of living. Before we begin, I invite you to take a slow, deep breath. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Feel your shoulders soften. Feel the air around you settle. Whatever your day has been, it can rest here now. You can rest here now. This story is for those who can't quite fall asleep because the mind won't stop talking, for those who feel a weight they can't name, for those who need to be reminded that life, even when uncertain, still carries beauty in its quiet corners. Harold was not a man who sought attention. He liked his mornings calm, his tea warm, and his life simple. But sometimes life finds us, even when we're not looking. And what he found, that small, unexpected lump, became the beginning of a journey that would test him, humble him, and in the end, open his heart wider than he ever imagined. But this isn't a story about illness, not really. It's a story about awareness, about slowing down enough to notice, about facing fear without losing gentleness. So, as you listen, let the sound of my voice become slower, softer. Imagine the room dimming a little, the air cool against your skin. Maybe there's a small lamp beside you, its light warm and golden. Maybe you can hear your own breathing, steady and calm. You don't need to do anything but listen. Each story here is a small reminder that healing isn't only found in hospitals or medicine. Sometimes it's found in stillness, in moments like this. And if you find comfort here tonight, if this gentle storytelling helps you drift closer to sleep, I invite you to stay connected. Subscribe so you can return anytime your thoughts get too loud. There will always be a place for you here, a place for calm, kindness, and quiet courage. Now, let's begin Harold's story. Harold had always believed his body was predictable. It woke him at the same hour each morning, craved the same breakfast of toast and marmalade, and moved through the day with slow, reliable rhythm. At 72, he trusted that rhythm more than anything else. That morning began like any other. The kettle hissed softly, the radio murmured in the background, and light filtered through the curtains in pale gold ribbons. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and the faint sweetness of the rose bush outside the window. He reached for his mug from the top shelf, stretching just enough to feel the faint tug along his arm. It was then he noticed it, a small, firm swelling beneath his skin just above his left chest. He paused, frowning slightly, pressing it again, wondering if it was a muscle knot or something harmless. It didn't hurt. It didn't move. It was simply there. For a moment, he considered ignoring it. After all, men didn't get breast lumps. That was something women dealt with. He chuckled quietly to himself, half dismissing it as an oddity of age. But as the day went on, his fingers returned to it again and again, as if drawn by an invisible worry. By evening, when the sun dipped below the garden wall and the air turned cooler, Harold sat in his favorite chair by the window, his thoughts looping in quiet circles. The lump wasn't big, but it was real, and it didn't belong there. He remembered his late wife, Margaret, who used to say that the body speaks in whispers before it ever cries out. She had always been the careful one, noticing small things before they grew into big ones. He could almost hear her voice now, calm and certain, telling him to get it checked. Still, he hesitated. It wasn't fear of doctors that held him back. It was something subtler, a quiet disbelief that anything serious could happen to him now. He had made it through decades of work, the loss of loved ones, the loneliness that sometimes pressed down at night. Surely a tiny lump was nothing compared to all that. That night, as he prepared for bed, the mirror caught him in profile. The lump was barely visible beneath the thin cotton of his pajama shirt, but he could feel it like a secret, sitting quietly under his skin. He turned off the light and lay in the dark, his mind restless. Sleep came in fragments. In the quiet spaces between dreams, he found himself thinking of Margaret again, of the day she had found a similar lump years ago. Her journey had been long, filled with treatments and silences, courage and exhaustion. She had faced it with grace. She had survived it for years. But eventually, time had other plans. When Harold woke, the morning light was pale and uncertain. He made his tea as usual, but his hands trembled slightly. He thought about calling his daughter, but the words felt heavy. He didn't want to worry her, not over something so small. Instead, he opened his notebook, the one where he jotted grocery lists and reminders. On a clean page, he wrote 2 words: "Call doctor." Then he underlined them, twice. But the call didn't happen that day, or the day after. The week drifted by, ordinary on the surface, uneasy underneath. Harold tended to his garden, fed the neighbor's cat, and walked to the market as usual. Yet every time he lifted his arm or reached for something, he could feel it, a quiet reminder pressed into his chest. One evening, as he sat outside watching the light fade, his neighbor, Mrs. Fletcher, waved from her porch. She was a nurse, retired but still sharp-eyed. They chatted about the weather, about the tomatoes that refused to ripen, but before parting, she tilted her head and looked at him closely. "You've been quieter lately, Harold. Everything all right?" He hesitated. His hand drifted instinctively toward his chest, then stopped. For a heartbeat, he thought about telling her. But then he smiled faintly, a small, practiced smile that said everything was fine. "Just tired," he said. "Summer heat, you know." She nodded, but her eyes lingered. People like her always noticed more than they said. That night, when Harold returned inside, he felt a strange sense of guilt. It wasn't lying exactly, but it wasn't the truth either. The small, firm lump seemed to pulse quietly beneath his shirt, as if reminding him that silence doesn't make something disappear. By the end of the week, he finally picked up the phone. The tone buzzed softly against his ear, and his voice trembled slightly when the receptionist answered. He scheduled the appointment for Tuesday morning. "Nothing urgent," he said, "just a checkup." When he hung up, the house felt oddly still. He stared at the phone for a long time, then exhaled slowly, as if releasing something heavy he'd been carrying too long. That night, the wind outside was soft, rustling the curtains like a sigh. Harold turned off the light and lay awake for a while, listening to the rhythm of his heartbeat beneath his palm. It wasn't fear now. Not quite. It was something deeper, the quiet awareness that life, however steady it seems, can change in the space of a breath. And though he didn't know it yet, that small, quiet choice to call, to listen, to notice, was the beginning of a story that would change everything. The waiting room smelled faintly of disinfectant and paper. It was a small clinic tucked between a bakery and a post office, a place Harold had visited for years for the usual things: checkups, flu shots, and once a sprained wrist from pruning roses too ambitiously. He knew the nurses by name, and they knew his quiet manners, his gentle humor. But this morning felt different. The clock ticked a little louder. The air seemed slower. Harold sat near the window, his hat resting on his knees, the folded paper with his appointment details peeking out of his coat pocket. Outside, the day was pale and cloudy, with a drizzle beginning to tap against the glass. Inside, A young mother kept her child entertained with a soft, humming tune. Across the room, an old man coughed quietly into his handkerchief. The ordinary sounds of waiting filled the space. A phone ringing once, the shuffle of papers, the faint squeak of shoes on the polished floor. When the nurse finally called his name, Harold rose carefully, smoothing his jacket out of habit. His steps were slow but steady as he followed her down the hallway, lined with framed photos of smiling patients and staff picnics from years past. Dr. Mason greeted him with the same calm warmth he always had. A man in his 50s, with kind eyes and a voice that made you feel as if nothing in the world was beyond fixing. Harold had always trusted that tone. "How are we today, Harold?" "Fine. Mostly," he said, lowering himself into the chair. "Just something I thought I should have checked." Dr. Mason nodded and opened Harold's file, tapping his pen lightly. "Go on." Harold hesitated, fingers brushing the front of his shirt. "There's a lump. Left side. It's small, doesn't hurt, but it's been there about 2 weeks now." The doctor's expression didn't change, but his posture grew a little more focused. "All right, let's have a look." The examination room was quiet, except for the sound of gloves snapping and paper rustling under Harold's arm. The light was soft but cold, and Harold watched the doctor's face rather than his own reflection in the metallic instruments nearby. When Dr. Mason found the spot, he pressed gently, then again, slower this time. Harold could feel the pressure, the stillness that followed. "It's firm," Mason said softly, almost to himself. "Not tender? No pain." He made a few notes, then offered a reassuring nod. "Probably nothing serious, Harold. Could be a cyst, could be some fatty tissue. But I'd like to run a quick ultrasound, maybe a mammogram to be sure." Harold blinked. "Mammogram? For a man?" The doctor smiled gently. "It's uncommon, but yes. Men have breast tissue too, just less of it. It's rare, but not impossible. Let's just be cautious." Harold nodded slowly. The words felt strange, like hearing a song played in the wrong key. He tried to make light of it. "I suppose there's a first time for everything." "Exactly. It's likely nothing. But let's be thorough." After the appointment, Harold sat again in the waiting area, this time with a small envelope of referral papers. He watched the rain outside grow heavier, streaking the glass in thin silver lines. Around him, life went on, the receptionist laughing softly with a colleague, the mother now coaxing her child into a raincoat. Ordinary life, untroubled. Yet inside him, something had shifted. It wasn't panic, not yet. It was more like an echo, faint and persistent, a thought that whispered, "What if?" When he stepped back into the drizzle, the cool air brushed his face. He buttoned his coat all the way up, tucked his papers safely inside, and walked home at his usual slow pace. The puddles reflected the dull gray sky, and his umbrella clicked softly with each step. At home, he hung his coat, set his hat on the hook, and boiled water for tea. He moved through the motions automatically, spooning sugar, stirring, sitting by the window again. His reflection in the glass looked older than usual, the soft gray of his hair blending with the overcast light outside. He thought of Margaret again, how she used to tell him to face things early, not to let worry sit in the shadows. She had been so brave when it was her turn, never once complaining, even on the hard days. He wondered if she would be proud of him now for going, for not pretending it wasn't there. The phone rang. It was his daughter, Anna, checking in as she often did on Tuesdays. He almost told her, but stopped himself just as the words reached his lips. Not yet, he thought. Not until there's something to say. The next morning, he went for the ultrasound. The technician was kind, speaking in that careful, gentle tone people use when they sense unease. The gel was cold against his skin, and the machine hummed softly, its screen flickering in shades of gray and white. He watched the shadows move, but couldn't tell what they meant. The technician smiled faintly, professional but polite. "The doctor will review it with you, Mr. Barnes. Probably in a few days." A few days, he thought. Long enough for his imagination to wander through every possible outcome. When he got home, he made soup, read for a while, and went to bed early. But sleep didn't come easily. His body felt heavier somehow, not from pain, but from the quiet burden of waiting. He dreamt of the sea, of standing on the shore, the horizon endless and gray, waves touching his feet but never pulling him under. When he woke, the sound of the rain outside made the dream linger longer than usual. By Friday, the clinic called. Dr. Mason wanted to see him Monday morning. Harold thanked the nurse and set the phone down slowly. The air in the room felt still again, thick with unspoken things. He looked toward the window where the sky was just beginning to clear after days of rain. A thin beam of sunlight stretched across the table, landing softly on the paper where he'd written the doctor's name. He took a deep breath. Monday. Whatever the answer was, he would face it. But as he stood there, hand resting on the chair, he felt again the weight of the unknown. Not sharp, but deep and quiet, like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples would come soon enough. The clock on the wall ticked softly, each sound stretching into the space between breaths. Elizabeth sat on the examination table, her hands folded neatly in her lap, a small gesture of composure she didn't quite feel. The white paper beneath her crinkled as she shifted. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender hand lotion, a strange mixture of sterility and human touch. Dr. Meyer entered quietly, his footsteps slow and deliberate. His face was calm, but carried that subtle heaviness of someone about to speak a truth that would rearrange another person's world. He closed the door gently, as if afraid that the sound might startle her heart. Elizabeth managed a faint smile. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind, trying to imagine what it would feel like when he said the words. But no amount of rehearsal could make her ready. He sat down opposite her, his hands folded over a thin folder, her folder. He looked at it, then back at her. "Elizabeth," he began softly, "the results came back." There was a pause, the kind that hangs heavy with everything that could still go either way. She nodded once, her fingers tightening slightly. "There is a small mass," he said, voice careful, measured, yet warm. "It is malignant." The word seemed to echo, slow and hollow. Malignant. Elizabeth felt the edges of the room blur. Not with fear exactly, but with the sudden awareness of how fragile the ground beneath her had become. Her heart beat faster, her mind reaching for something to hold on to. Perhaps the soft hum of the fluorescent light, the sound of her breathing, the calmness in Dr. Meyer's tone. He went on gently, explaining that it was caught early, that there were options, that medicine had come a long way. His voice was steady, a quiet rhythm that reminded her of rain against a window pane. Soft, continuous, reassuring. She nodded again, but her thoughts drifted away, tracing back through time. She thought of her mother's hands folding laundry on a sunlit afternoon, of her husband's laughter years ago when they had danced in the kitchen to an old waltz, of the garden she loved, where pink peonies bloomed each May. Life, she thought, had always been full of small, beautiful things. When Dr. Meyer finished, he looked at her carefully. "Do you have someone to come with you to the next appointment?" "Yes," she whispered, though she wasn't sure whom she would ask. Perhaps her daughter, perhaps her friend Clara, or perhaps she would go alone, as she often did. He handed her a pamphlet, soft pastel colors, comforting words printed in careful type, support groups, treatment plans, hope. As she left the office, the late afternoon light spilled across the hallway floor in long golden stripes. She paused by the window for a moment. Outside, a tree swayed gently in the breeze, its branches whispering something ancient, something kind. Elizabeth took a deep breath. The world hadn't changed. Not really. The sky was still vast, the birds still flew, the sun still set. But inside her, a new chapter had quietly opened. Walking down the hospital corridor, she felt an odd mix of fear and gratitude. Fear for the unknown that awaited her. Gratitude that she still had time to walk, to feel the wind, to listen to her heartbeat and know she was still here. When she stepped outside, the evening air was cool. She tilted her face toward the sky, its color deepening into twilight. Somewhere within that quiet blue, she found a thread of peace. Thin, trembling, but real. And with that, she whispered to herself, almost like a promise, I will face this, gently. Winter crept in quietly that year. The mornings were slower, the air carried a crisp stillness, and a soft frost touched the windows of Elizabeth's cottage. Each breath felt visible, like the world was exhaling alongside her. On the kitchen table, a small calendar was marked with neat blue circles, dates for hospital visits, scans, and treatments. She had drawn tiny hearts beside each one, a quiet reminder that every appointment was not just a burden, but a step toward healing. The first day of chemotherapy came with a hush of fear. The hospital wing smelled faintly of alcohol wipes and warm plastic. Nurses moved gently, their voices practiced in kindness. Elizabeth sat by the window, wrapped in her wool shawl, her knitting tucked in a small bag at her side. She had chosen the chair nearest to the light. A young nurse named Hannah smiled as she prepared the IV. It'll sting a little, then you might feel sleepy, she said softly. Elizabeth nodded, her gaze steady. She had known pain before, the kind that follows loss, the kind that lingers in silence, and this felt different. It was the pain of fighting for more time. As the first drops began to flow through the tube, Elizabeth looked out at the garden below. The trees were bare, their branches delicate against the gray sky. She thought of how even in winter, roots remained alive beneath the frozen ground, hidden strength, quiet endurance. Around her, other patients sat in silence, each wrapped in their own story. A man hummed under his breath. A woman read a novel with trembling hands. The sound of machines filled the room, a slow, steady rhythm of hope and fatigue. Hours passed in a calm blur. The IV bag emptied, the color of the liquid faintly golden. Elizabeth felt a wave of nausea rise and fade, her eyes closing for a moment. She imagined herself floating, not away, but through, a river that carried her gently forward. When it was over, Hannah brought her a cup of peppermint tea. You did beautifully, she said, her tone light but sincere. Elizabeth smiled, her lips pale, yet her eyes bright. Thank you, she whispered, holding the cup close to her chest like something precious. The weeks that followed were both long and short. Some mornings, Elizabeth woke to find her strength waiting for her, patient and steady. Other days, she found it missing, replaced by a weight that pressed against her ribs. Her hair began to fall in soft strands, gathering on her pillow like autumn leaves. She cut it short one afternoon, standing before the mirror in her small bathroom, humming to herself. The reflection that looked back was different, yes, but still her. Her daughter, Clara, visited often. They would sit by the window, sipping tea and watching the snow drift down. Sometimes they talked about recipes, neighbors, old family trips. Other times they simply sat in silence, a quiet communion that said more than words ever could. On good days, Elizabeth returned to her garden. Even in the cold, she found comfort there, tending to the soil, checking the bulbs she had planted before the diagnosis. The rhythm of her hands moving through the earth reminded her of something ancient and grounding. Life continued, she thought. It always did. At the hospital, she grew close to the others in her treatment group. They exchanged small stories, laughter, recipes, sometimes tears. One afternoon, a woman named Marta brought a tin of homemade cookies. Eat one, she said, pressing it into Elizabeth's palm for courage. Elizabeth laughed softly and took a bite, sweet, warm, and full of love, like the moment itself. As months passed, the hospital became strangely familiar, not just a place of fear, but a place of connection. The nurses greeted her by name, the receptionist waved, and even the machines began to hum in a rhythm she could predict. Each treatment ended with a quiet ritual. Elizabeth would stand by the window in the waiting area, breathe deeply, and whisper a small prayer, not of pleading, but of thanks. For another day, for another chance, for the kindness that bloomed in unlikely places. By spring, her body had changed. She was thinner, slower, but inside there was a softness that hadn't been there before. Not weakness, but a gentle strength born of endurance. She had learned to listen to herself, to rest without guilt, to let the world move at its own pace. One afternoon, as the cherry blossoms began to open outside the hospital, Dr. Meyer met her with a small smile. "The scans look good," he said simply. Elizabeth nodded, her eyes welling before she even realized. She covered her mouth with her hand, laughing softly through her tears. She walked home that day with a quiet sense of grace. The sky was pale blue. The air smelled faintly of earth and rain. When she reached her front gate, she paused to look at her garden, small shoots pushing through the soil, reaching toward the sun. She crouched down, brushing the dirt gently with her fingertips. This was what survival felt like, she thought. Not triumphant or loud, but tender. Like the first bloom after winter, like the whisper of wind through the trees saying softly, "You made it." That night, Elizabeth sat by her window with a cup of tea, the moonlight spilling across her hands. Her body was tired, her spirit calm. She thought of everyone she had met, the nurses, the patients, her daughter's laughter, and smiled. Outside, the stars shimmered faintly, distant yet constant. And for the first time in many months, she allowed herself to close her eyes without fear. She whispered into the stillness, "Tomorrow will come, and I'll be here to see it." Morning sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, brushing across the pale walls of Elizabeth's bedroom. The world outside had shifted. Winter had melted away, leaving behind the scent of soil, of rain, of beginnings. For the first time in a long while, she woke without the heaviness that used to cling to her chest. Her breath felt easier, her heart lighter. She sat on the edge of the bed, fingers curling around a warm mug of tea, watching dust motes dance in the sunbeam. The house was quiet. It was always quiet now, but it no longer felt empty, only still, like the pause before a melody continues. It had been 6 months since her last treatment, 6 months of slow rebuilding. Her hair had started to grow back, soft and silver at the roots, curling gently behind her ears. Sometimes she caught her reflection and smiled, not at what she had lost, but at what she had gained. The quiet wisdom of someone who has touched the edge of darkness and returned. In the kitchen, the old radio hummed faintly, playing a song from decades ago, one she used to dance to with her husband. She let the melody fill the air, her hands swaying slightly as she moved to open the windows. Outside, the garden greeted her with life. Tulips stood tall, the grass shimmered with dew, and birds perched on the fence chirping like tiny messengers of hope. Elizabeth stepped out barefoot, feeling the coolness of the morning earth. The soil yielded gently beneath her feet, alive and forgiving. She crouched down beside the rosebush she had thought would die last winter, yet here it was, green and full of promise. Her fingers brushed the new leaves, tender and strong. The days took on a new rhythm. She spent her mornings in the garden, her afternoons reading or writing letters, and her evenings walking along the small road behind the house. The world seemed sharper now, colors deeper, sounds more meaningful. Even the silence carried weight, a kind of peace that came from surviving what once felt unsurvivable. One afternoon, Clara arrived with her son, a small, bright-eyed boy named Theo. He ran across the yard, chasing butterflies, his laughter ringing through the air like wind chimes. Elizabeth watched him with quiet joy, the corners of her lips curving into a smile that felt effortless. "Mom," Clara said softly, setting down a basket of fresh bread and fruit. "You look good, really good." Elizabeth laughed gently. "That's because I'm still here." Clara knelt beside her, brushing dirt from her mother's hands. "You scared me, she whispered. I scared myself too," Elizabeth replied, her eyes kind. "But sometimes fear teaches us how much life still matters." They sat together under the apricot tree, sharing slices of bread with honey, watching Theo explore the garden. The afternoon sun painted everything in soft gold. It was one of those moments that felt suspended, like time itself had decided to rest. As the weeks passed, Elizabeth began to write again. Short notes, reflections, and sometimes small stories about the people she met during her treatment. She wrote about Hannah, the nurse with gentle hands, about Marta and her cookies, about the quiet man who hummed old songs between ivory drips. She wrote not to remember the pain, but to honor the humanity that had bloomed in it. Each page felt like a candle, a way of lighting small corners of memory. In the evenings, she took long walks through the village. The streets were familiar, yet somehow new. Freshly painted doors, the scent of bread from the bakery, children riding bicycles past the church. The world had moved on, but it had also waited for her in its own way. One evening, she stopped by the riverbank. The sky was painted in hues of amber and rose, the water reflecting its gentle fire. She sat on a bench, her hands folded in her lap, feeling the slow pulse of life around her. A fisherman nearby nodded in greeting. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said. "It is," she replied softly. "I used to think beauty belonged to the young. Now I know it belongs to the living." He smiled, perhaps understanding, perhaps not. But it didn't matter. The moment was whole. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Elizabeth felt a breeze lift her hair. She closed her eyes, and for a heartbeat, she felt the same peace she used to find when she prayed. Not a prayer for rescue, but for gratitude, for the simple miracle of now. Now. At home, night descended with a soft grace. The house was warm, the lights dim. She prepared a cup of chamomile tea, her hands steady, her breath slow. Sitting by the window, she looked out at the stars, countless, shimmering, alive. She thought of everyone walking through their own darkness somewhere in the world, scared, tired, waiting for light to return. And she wished she could tell them this, that the light never truly leaves. It hides sometimes behind clouds, behind fear, behind pain, but it waits. And when the time comes, it returns, quiet, patient, and full of mercy. The clock ticked gently. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. The moon rose, silver and soft, casting a glow over the garden. The roses swayed lightly in the breeze, their petals catching the moonlight like tiny mirrors. Elizabeth smiled, her eyes heavy with peace. She leaned back in her chair, feeling the warmth of the tea radiate through her chest. Her heart beat slowly, not with the rush of survival, but with the calm rhythm of belonging. Tomorrow would come, as all tomorrows do, and when it did, she would wake again to the light, the real, fragile, glorious light, and greet it as an old friend. The world outside her window was vast and alive, and she was part of it once more. Not as someone recovering, but as someone returned, someone whole, someone ready to live gently, quietly, beautifully, beneath the endless sky. The night has deepened now. The world outside your window has grown still, save for the soft hum of the wind and the occasional whisper of passing leaves. Maybe you're lying in bed, the room dimly lit, eyes half closed as the rhythm of this story slows your breathing. We've walked a long road together tonight, through fear, through healing, through the fragile beauty of being alive. Elizabeth's journey, like many others, began in uncertainty and pain. Yet somehow, through patience, kindness, and courage, she found her way back into the light. And maybe that's what this story was always meant to be. Not about illness or endings, but about the quiet return of hope. If you're listening now, perhaps you've faced your own shadows too. Maybe you've lost something or someone. Maybe you've woken in the middle of the night with thoughts that won't settle, wondering how to begin again. But as you breathe gently and slowly, I hope you can feel it. That same soft truth that guided Elizabeth home. Healing is never a single moment. It's the quiet rhythm of choosing to live again and again. Even the smallest act, getting out of bed, smiling at a stranger, making tea, becomes a victory. Life, after all, isn't about escaping the storm, but learning to stand still long enough to notice the rain easing. So tonight, before you drift off to sleep, let your heart rest. Let the worries of the day untangle and fall away. You don't have to solve everything now. The moon will keep its watch, the earth will turn, and morning will come with its pale light and quiet promise. Maybe when you wake, the world will seem a little softer. The sunlight will fall across your room in a familiar way. The same air you've always breathed will taste new somehow, like peace. Thank you for staying till the end of this story. Thank you for sharing this quiet space, for allowing words, soft and human, to keep you company tonight. If this story touched you, I'd love to know. Leave a comment below and share how it made you feel, or tell me what kind of story you'd like to hear next. Perhaps something hopeful or something nostalgic. Perhaps a tale that reminds you of your youth, or a voice that simply keeps you company when sleep feels far away. Your thoughts help shape the next journey, the next gentle night we'll share together. For now, take one last deep breath. Feel the warmth in your chest. The world is resting, and so should you. Good night, dear listener. May your dreams be kind, your heart be light, and your tomorrow filled with quiet wonder. Sleep well. The light will find you again. And now, dear listener, as the stars begin to fade and the night folds itself into quiet, it's time to rest. You've traveled far tonight, not through galaxies or distant worlds, but through the tender corridors of memory. You've walked the old streets again, sat beneath the silver glow of a drive-in screen, and felt that warm, familiar wonder that once filled your heart in May of 1977. You've remembered what it was like to be young, to hold someone's hand as the lights dimmed, to hear that triumphant music for the first time, to believe that anything was possible beyond the next sunrise. Maybe, if you close your eyes, you can still hear the faint hum of the film projector, or the crickets singing beyond the gravel lot. Maybe you can still feel the summer air against your cheek, soft and just a little sweet. As you lie there now, letting your breathing slow, think of the stars, the real ones, not the ones on the movie screen, but the ones that watched over you all these years. The same stars that hung above your childhood home, your first apartment, your longest road trips, your quiet evenings on the porch. They haven't gone anywhere. They've just been waiting for you to look up again. And isn't that comforting to know? That even when the years pass, when the theaters close and the drive-ins fade into memory, the sky still holds your story. It's still yours. So take a deep breath and let the world be gentle for a while. You've done enough today. The dishes can wait. The worries can rest. Tonight is for peace, for softness, for remembering the simple joys. The laughter, the popcorn, the glow of a screen that made you feel part of something vast and beautiful. If you're still awake, just know you're not alone. Somewhere out there, others are listening too, smiling quietly in the dark, drifting slowly into dreams of their own. Maybe they were at that same premiere. Maybe they were holding hands under the same night sky. And as you begin to drift, let the story settle into your heart like a lullaby. Let it remind you that you've lived through so many beautiful nights already, and there are still many more to come. Thank you truly for spending this evening here. If the story brought you a little